Red, white and blue.
Okay. Oh, I don't see this.
All of the colours of jolly good England too. Red, white and blue.
Scotland is
Scotland.
believers.
Yeah, white and blue. White and blue.
We're not English. What is
Scottish. You're Bonnie Scott. I'm Scott. Yeah.
Irish, Indian.
Indians, right?
Like in America or
Can we announce? Can I start?
Anytime you like, yeah.
Okay.
But now we need we
Pinnacle of our pilgrimage,
I'm trying to find
and also this is the test of your shamatha. With all that is going on,
suddenly.
listen to him and we'll have a quiz at the end. Okay?
This will be right.
So thank you, Dr. Wallace, for this blessing, the gift we have.
Do we once again have amplification here?
Yes.
Let's try that. How is this work? Not bad, yeah? Augustine in the back, it's quite clear, yeah? Is it clear enough?
Excuse me, please, Alan.
You
No
can get
problem.
closer.
Yeah, you can all come closer if you like.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Because I'm not very good at speaking loudly.
Can you sit just on the other side? I got the camera right on. Oh, so you can just sit on the other side of Jay.
Get closer. Closer.
Then they will be in front of the speaker.
It's okay. Sound is not directional. It goes in all directions. This is how the Buddha taught. Close.
So Raviji, I think we need to end at 12:15, is that right?
I'll stop you to yes.
But that's when we're ending.
Yes.
Okay. When there's a lot of noise in the background or in the environment, I can hear it.
No, you need to come very close.
The microphone is on, I can hear something being amplified, but whether you can hear is another question. But something is working. Yeah, how is it in the back? Is it, you can hear?
You need to come close.
That's it, Andy, come closer.
Do you want to sit on this bag?
Everybody can squish closer. Because I'm not going to be shouting beneath the Bodhitree. If I were selling bananas, then I would say, Kela, Kela, I'm selling Kelas. But since I'm not selling bananas, then I have to speak a normal voice.
Does it look like you've had a pee?
Or, garam chai, garam chai, garam chai. Then you can speak loudly. Hot tea, hot tea.
Yes, please. Haji.
Yeah. Hot tea, yeah, that's whenever, I remember when I was traveling in the Indian trains 40 years ago, come to any station, garam chai, garam chai, garam chai. It's the mantra, yeah. Everybody's ready for hot tea, right? 2 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, any time is a time for garam chai, hot tea, hot tea. Oh yeah, but when there is a lot of noise in the environment, I know my own natural reaction is to want to be very quiet inside. Rather than trying to be louder from the inside to drown out the outside, I'd rather just be totally silent on the inside, and then the outside noise doesn't bother at all, right? And so, as we begin, how I'd like to begin would be just by quietly, silently taking refuge, cultivating bodhicitta, and then we can proceed, okay? But we don't need the liturgy. There's many liturgies, so everybody else is doing the liturgy for us, all the chanting. The monks, the Theravada monks, Thai monks, Tibetan monks, they're all doing the liturgy. Why don't we just do it quietly, okay? Olasu. So we always begin with motivation. It has such a strong influence on the depth of meaning, how significant our action is. Hinges so much on motivation. So here we are, at least in the vicinity of the Bodhitree, and very close to where the Buddha awoke in the deepest possible way. And I'd like to link the thoughts that I'll share with you this morning with the thoughts the other day in Saranat, where the Buddha's first turning of the wheel of Dharma began with this emphasis on finding the middle way. You recall, yes? Avoiding the extremes of just an indulgent life, pursuit of hedonic pleasure, but also avoiding the extreme of austerities, of self-mortification. And so I'd like to pick up, of course we're going back a little bit in time, we're going in reverse chronology, because there he was, having been here, he walked to Saranat and first turned the wheel of Dharma. But what happened before he came here? Well, of course we know that 6 years early he had left his home. The first thing he sought out was, first one and then two great masters of samadhi, the highest technology. It was the IT of his time, information technology of his time, and that is he sought out great accomplished masters, first one and then another, who could train him in samadhi, the finest contemplative technology that was really uniquely developed in India. And he turned out to be a tremendous prodigy. If he hadn't been, he would have just wound up being one more anonymous disciple of a Swami in India. But he very quickly achieved these profound states of samadhi, a first one and then a second teacher, but finding that samadhi in and of itself, simply making the mind very subtle, profoundly withdrawing the attention from all sensory impressions, stilling the mind to greater and greater degrees of subtlety, to the point of virtual inactivity, so totally removed from appearances, as profoundly peaceful as that was, and seemingly transcendent, sooner or later the sheer power of samadhi would wear off. And then when you came out of samadhi, essentially you were where you began. So it's not that different than the pursuit of hedonic pleasure, going out and have a really good time, a vacation, buying a new possession, and enjoying it for some time, and then after a while you don't enjoy it anymore, and there you are exactly where you were before. Nothing really happened. And whether it happened in waking reality or it happened in a dream, you can hardly tell, because you are right where you were in the first place. It just took you around the block, and the block is called samsara. It just takes you around and around and around. Okay? So he was finding that the pursuit of and the achievement of even the deepest possible states of samadhi was just once more going around the block, right? And so, with great respect, he disengaged from his two teachers, having achieved their own states of samadhi, and then he, as you all know, I think, he then spent the next 6 years or so in utterly mind-boggling austerities, self-mortification, and then we know, finding that too had just crippled his health, taken away his vitality, and therefore the clarity of his mind. He found now his mind was not serviceable, so that couldn't possibly be the way, just to damage the body with sheer willpower, that somehow that would be the path to awakening. It turned out to be not the case. So, not very far from here, a young woman came to him with great reverence, and her name was Sujata. The name may ring a bell if you've noticed where we're staying. Her name was Sujata, and she offered, with great reverence to this ascetic, she offered him milk and rice, or milk rice. Very pure, very clean, very nourishing food. And he took this, and then by restoring the vitality to his body, kind of got back to equilibrium. But then one can say, well, but wait a minute, 6 years ago you were in equilibrium. 6 years ago you had a good meal. You got that at home. So now exactly have you just gone around the block over the last 6 years, and you were in good health when you started, and then you got really bad health, and now you have good health again. So exactly where are you now that you weren't 6 years ago? And so that thought occurred to him. Where to now? Because the first thing he tried was the most promising avenue that had been achieved by the great contemplatives of his era and earlier centuries upon centuries of yogis, and that is this unique contribution to world contemplative culture, and that is the development of samadhi. The Indians developed more than the Chinese, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mayans. Nobody got samadhi like the Indians did. That was really one of their great unique contributions. That by itself didn't work. The ascetic practices by themselves didn't work. And so you might imagine, if you try to, again, let go on a flight of imagination, put yourself in his shoes, His dedication to the pursuit of liberation was unabated. There was no disillusionment there, but he now knew two things that didn't work. He already knew from the first 29 years of his life that simply living at home, sensually enjoying life, that doesn't go anywhere. 6 years of asceticism, including however long it took him to achieve samadhi, that didn't go anywhere. So then one might can imagine him wondering, what now? Because he can't follow any familiar track. Most people were following the familiar track of simply pursuing hedonic pleasure. A few, the shramanas, the wandering ascetics, most of them were following either samadhi or some form of ascetic practice. But that didn't work, that didn't work. So if he's going to find that which he was seeking, he couldn't be following in the footprints of anyone of his era. He had to strike out on his own, he had to do something fresh. But what would that be? Because he can now no longer go with the flow. As I said before, his teachings go against the grain, against the flow, but where is that going to be? Right? And so, at that point, at this critical juncture, his health is restored. And now he's wondering, where to now? Right? Because he could be thinking, I failed. I failed in all ways, and now where? Right? And with this question, where to now, he said, I thought of a time when my Sakyan father was working and I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree. And this was when he was a youth, quite secluded from sensual desires. So there he was, disengaging from one extreme, disengaged from unwholesome things. I had entered upon and abode in the first dhyana, the first meditative stabilization, which is really the achievement of shamatha, right? Which is accompanied by coarse and precise investigation, with well-being and bliss born of seclusion. So he recalled that just spontaneously, as a youth, he achieved the first jhana. Later on, at the age of 29, he achieved way beyond the first jhana. All four jhanas, all four absorptions, or samapatis in the formless realm, going subtler and subtler and subtler. But he already knew that didn't work. But then he thought, but what about that time when spontaneously I entered into a state of samadhi that was not the most subtle, that was very balanced. The mind was stable, the mind was clear, but his full faculties of inquiry, of coarse and subtle investigation, which was imbued with a sense of well-being, even bliss, and of course single-pointed attention. When those were all on tap, they're called the 5 jhana factors. They were all on call, all accessible for him to use. In other words, the mind very stabilized, but also serviceable in the active investigation, inquiry into the nature of reality. So what about that? And he recalled that, and then this question here, now at the age of 35, now that he's nourished again, thanks to Sujata, he said, I thought, might that be the way to enlightenment? That first jhana. Or we can simply say shamatha, right? Access to the first jhana, oh, they were just right next door to each other. Might that be the way to enlightenment, right? And then following that memory, there came the recognition that this was the way to enlightenment. Well, what was the point there? Why would that be so significant? To achieve this first jhana, or at least access to the first jhana, and that is that in the first jhana, you've not only realized the 5 jhana factors, which you just mentioned, coarse and subtle investigation, bliss and a sense of well-being, and then single-pointedness of mind, but also, and very importantly, you're free of what are called the 5 nivarana, the 5 obscurations. 5 obscurations, including sensual craving. You've outgrown it. You've just outgrown it. You're just no longer attracted to any of the bounties of samsara. Not only sensual craving, but it's called the bounties of the desire realm. Fame, reputation, other people loving you, respecting you, praising you, the joys of wealth, the joys of power, the joys of reputation, all of the bounties, the things that most people are dedicating their lives to. You've just outgrown it. Because you've transcended, you've crossed over to the form realm, and all of the attractions of the desire realm have just gone, they faded out. So you are free of sensual craving. You're free of malice, which arises when our sensual craving or our craving for, again, fame, reputation, wealth, and so forth, when that's blocked, it can give rise to unhappiness, unhappiness gives rise to anger, anger gives rise to malice. I want to harm, I want to, knock down whatever is obstructing me. You're free of malice when you're in that first jhana. You're free of laxity and dullness. You know a lot about that from your practice of shamatha. You're free of excitation and anxiety. You know this as well, and you're free of uncertainty, the vacillating, uncertain mind. Each of these 5 obscurations is obscuring the natural luminosity of your own awareness. The natural purity, the natural luminosity. This was referred to in a lecture we just heard in Nalanda, just yesterday. Remember the ascetic who had already gained some deep realization and asked, what is the nature of the mind? And the Buddha said, it is luminous. Luminous. What's the nature of consciousness? By nature, luminous and pure. Well, these 5 obscurations obscure, they veil, they make invisible to us the natural purity and luminosity of our own minds. And how so? Sensual craving is like the water mixing it with the dye. You can't see the water, you can just see the dye, right? Malice is like boiling water. You can't see the water, you're just seeing all the churning, bubbling. Laxity and dullness are like the water covered over with moss. Excitation and anxiety are like water whipped by wind. And finally, uncertainty is like turbid, muddy water. So each of those 5, in one way or another, is obscuring the natural purity, the natural luminosity of our own awareness. And so the Buddha, speaking of these 5 obscurations, said that so as long as these 5 obscurations are not abandoned, as long as your mind is still dominated by any or all of these 5 obscurations, he said, one considers himself to be indebted, sick, in bonds, enslaved, and lost in a desert track. In other words, you're in sad shape. And you will be in sad shape whether you're a billionaire, whether you're the most glamorous movie star in the world, whether you're successful, you're unsuccessful, you're equally trapped, whether you're a Bill Gates or whether you're living in a trash heap. Anywhere in the whole spectrum, you're all equally enslaved by the inner trappings of these 5 obscurations. So with this achievement of the first jhana, you gain access to what is called, you might recall, the bhavanga, this grounded becoming, which is described in the Buddhist teachings as a naturally pure, unencumbered, luminous state of consciousness. And it manifests when awareness is withdrawn from the physical senses. So you see, the Buddha said, and I was quite secluded from sensual desires, the mind withdrawn from the desire realm. And when the activities of the mind, such as discursive thoughts, images, and so forth, have subsided, this happens when you fall deep asleep, but you're not clear. It happens when you're dead. Unfortunately, not a return trip, not to this life anyway, but it happens lucidly when you achieve shamatha, or when you achieve the first jhana. And so, with that basis, the Buddha had to re-accomplish. He had to sit down in meditation, and after all those 6 years of austerity, he had to sit down and re-accomplish what came spontaneously when he was youth. He sat down and he practiced shamatha. Here. And he was practicing mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati, here. That was his method for re-achieving that which he had spontaneously as a youth. He practiced here, but rather than zooming off to the 4th jhana and the samapitis and all of that higher, more subtle states of consciousness, he just got to the 1st jhana, and then using that as a platform where he'd really investigate into the nature of reality, as if he had launched the Hubble telescope of the mind beyond the atmospheric distortions of your coarse mind, your mind into the desire realm, beyond the atmospheric distortions of your human mind, into the form realm, beyond the mere psyche, the coarse mind, and then orbiting that, then launched the deep probe into the nature of reality. Well, what was the first thing he looked at? From that kind of Hubble telescope platform, where did he direct his attention? What was he interested in now that he had this wonderfully transparent, stable, clear, still awareness, like a laser pointer? What was he interested in? Well, the first thing he was interested in is, where did I come from? He turned his attention to the past. And during the first watch of the night, here's what he said, now in his words, in English translation. When my concentrated mind, 1st jhana, was thus purified, bright, unblemished, and rid of imperfection, when it had become malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I inclined my mind to the knowledge of recollection of past lives. That's the first thing he did. In a way, he was retracing discoveries, or re-establishing through his own experience, discoveries made by generations and generations of earlier swamis, rishis, yogis, who preceded him, because the existence of past lives was already very well known. But now, with this tremendous momentum that he had from this and his own prior lifetimes of 3 countless eons, it is said, of accruing merit, he took this turbo-powered mind and directed it to the past, and he could direct his attention as far back as he liked, as far back as he wished, to 100 lifetimes, 1,000, 1,000,000, to cosmic cycles of expansion and contraction of the universe. Very much like Big Bang, but Big Bang, big contraction, Big Bang, big contraction, looking back through whole cosmic cycles and simply seeing lifetimes upon lifetimes, and the further he looked, the further he simply saw more. And so he recognized, okay, this is where I came from, and recognizing there was no identifiable beginning. He couldn't say, okay, there's where I was my own Adam. There was my first one. There was no first one. The further back he looked, and there was just more. That was his great discovery during the first night. And in fact, he did for this purpose. He said, he narrates how with his mind concentrated, purified, wieldy and stabilized in equanimity of the 4th jhana, 4th jhana, which is very, very pure, very, very lucid, he recollected the specific circumstances of many thousands of his own former lives over the course of many ages of world contraction and expansion. So he's using that as a platform, not just the 1st jhana, that was the launching pad, up to the 4th jhana, and then penetrating through and seeing this. And he said this was the first true knowledge. We would say this was the first discovery. This was the first discovery attained by me in the first watch of the night, right here. Ignorance was banished. Ignorance about where was my consciousness before I was born? Where did it come from? What's my past? Ignorance of this was banished, and true knowledge arose. Darkness was banished, and light arose, as happens in one who is diligent, ardent, and self-controlled. But I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over my mind. A very elegant way of saying I wasn't satisfied. And one can say, that's so cool, I'm going to write a paper. I'm definitely going to get tenure someplace. Because this is a big discussion. I should probably get a Nobel Prize for it, right? And just be satisfied with that. Look what I've discovered. That's pretty amazing. Lifetime upon lifetime through world contraction and expansion. But that was just the first night, watch of the night, and he said, I was not satisfied. I didn't rest on my laurels. But that was his first great insight, right? And the point is through direct knowledge. And so I think this, to my mind, and of course this is just my addition, but I think of the Buddha in a way as being like the Galileo of contemplative science in India. Because before him, for generations and generations, yogis had already achieved samadhi. But they'd used it overwhelmingly for its own sake. Samadhi for the sake of samadhi, samadhi for the sake of bliss, samadhi for the sake of peace, for the sake of transcendence, stillness, total disengagement from the phenomenal world, but not using it as a method for investigating reality, but a method for withdrawing from reality, withdrawing from what seemed to be samsara, not knowing that they're withdrawing like a yo-yo, but it keeps on coming out, come out, come out, come out. But that was the first point, but it was not by some brilliant philosophical insight or by investigating outwardly, but by investigating inwardly and through direct observation. So as Galileo took the telescope, which had been already developed, already invented, but never used to really explore anything, right? It was a wonderful, wonderful invention of the Dutch, but we don't hear of any discoveries made by the Dutch using this telescope. It was just kind of a cool gadget, right? But Galileo took that, refined it, developed it, and then used it in unprecedented ways. And that's what Gautama did with samadhi. The telescope of the mind, he refined it further and then used it in unprecedented ways to make discoveries and not simply to enjoy being or resting in samadhi. That was the first watch of the night. But it wasn't over because he wasn't satisfied. He wasn't satisfied, right? So we move on to the second watch of the night. And I think a watch of the night is, I think it's 3 hours or 4 hours, something like that. Something like that. So during the second watch of the night, then he continued. His thirst for exploring the nature of reality was not satiated. His thirst was not slaked. He next proceeded to observe the succession of lifetimes of other beings. So he checked out the trajectory of his own individual past life, but then he's surrounded by a world of sentient beings. What about them? Is he the only person with past lives? Is he unique? Or are we all in the same soup, or the same ocean called samsara? He next proceeded to observe the succession of lifetimes of other beings, but now going beyond simply noting, oh, she was such and such in the last life, and before that she was that, and before that she was that, and that, and that, and that. A whole bunch of staccato moments, a whole bunch of pages of past lives. Okay, all very well, this, but after a while you must get a little bit bored. Right? Everybody's kind of been everything. We've been in hell realms, Praetor realms, human realms, animal realms, and so forth and so on. After a while you say, okay, yawn. Okay, I've seen enough already. But now we go to more of a meta-analysis, rather than getting a whole bunch of snapshots. Because that's what it is, right? A snapshot. You were this in the past life. You were this in the past life. 500 lifetimes, you were this. Okay, we have a photo album, right, of his own and others' past lifetimes. But now, let's do the meta-analysis. Let's stand back and see, are these just a bunch of staccato, unrelated, random events? Like in a, what's called a pinball machine. It's just boing, 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 just roving around randomly, or is there some coherent sequence? Are there natural laws, natural patterns of causality from lifetime to lifetime? And here, like a true scientist, what could we call this except for a science of mind? The most sublime, extraordinary science of mind, to my mind, of course, as a Buddhist, I would say in the whole history of humanity. A science of the mind, of doing this vast meta-analysis of how many sentient beings who he was scanning, and then from the meta-analysis saying, okay, all of this, but now let's look at individual acts and consequences. He's now looking for causal patterns, not only in his own life, but for all sentient beings around him. What are the causal patterns? Is it random, or are there orderly sequences, natural sequences or patterns of causality? If given this, then this occurs. And so he was ascertaining the relations between deeds and their effects as they played out in subsequent lives. And I quote, I understood how beings pass on according to their actions, how our actions, our karma, the intentions underlying the actions, how these propel us from one lifetime to the next. This was the second true knowledge attained by me in the second watch of the night. And in terms of the nature of these sequences of lives, the patterns, what holds it all together so that it's coherent, that it's meaningful, you can make sense of it, rather than just having a bunch of snapshots from one lifetime to the next. Ignorance was banished. Ignorance of causality, ignorance of karma and its consequences. Ignorance was banished and true knowledge arose. He made a genuine discovery. Darkness was banished and a light arose, as happens in one who is diligent, ardent, and self-controlled. But I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over my mind. Again, a rather perhaps archaic or cumbersome way of saying, I wasn't satisfied. Again, this would be, as Galileo made these extraordinary discoveries of there are moons of Jupiter, there are craters on the moon, spots on the sun, snapshots of this and this and this. It took Newton's brilliance to go beyond the snapshots and to discover, because it really was a discovery, he didn't make them up, the three laws that really make understandable, intelligible, this vast array of movements of bodies through time and space, interacting with each other causally. Newton's three laws of mechanical interactivity, right? Considered to be one of the most brilliant discoveries in the whole history of physics. In fact, many people regard him as the greatest scientist in the whole history of Western science. But it was that meta-analysis, that the same laws that govern the orbit of the moon around the Earth, the same laws govern the movement of the apple dropping from the tree. One is circular, or more or less circular, and another one is straight line, but it's the same laws that cause this to go straight and this to go around in a circle, right? And so vast explanatory power of these three laws of Newton. Well, the Buddha discovered, in fact, 4 laws. I won't unpack them right now. They are 4 laws. They're 4 natural patterns of actions and their causes. The most important being, I won't give all the 4 of them now, you can find them in any good textbook on Buddhism, but the most important being that wholesome activity of body, speech, and mind gives rise to felicity, well-being. whereas unwholesome activities give rise to suffering. That's the most important one right there. And it's not because God said so. Nobody's punishing us. It wasn't that the Buddha is saying, hey, I have made up these laws, now you better obey me. But he's saying these were discoveries that I made, that the very fabric of reality is ethical. It's right there embedded in the very natural world itself, that some actions give rise to well-being, others give rise to suffering. Some must be in accordance with reality, some must be out of alignment with reality, and when we're out of alignment with reality, we suffer. In reality, in accordance with reality, we experience well-being. In other words, reality is giving us signposts all over the place. When we act in such a way that is virtuous, gives rise to well-being, it's almost like reality is giving us a pat on the back. That's the way to go. Right? And so this was his great discovery, with immensely more relevance for our daily lives than this extraordinary set of discoveries of the 3 laws of Newton, or later the 4 laws of Maxwell, understanding now electromagnetic activity. Whereas Newton was very good for billiard balls bumping into each other, the four equations of Maxwell then explain electromagnetic activity throughout the entire universe. And so it said, I've seen a t-shirt that lays out the 4 equations, which I spent 14 months studying many, many years ago, so I could really understand them, but lays out Maxwell's 4 equations, and the little quip said, and God said, and then the four equations, God said, the 4 equations, and there was light. It's very cute. Vast explanatory power. I devoted 14 weeks just to studying those, because they're some of the most extraordinarily beautiful and powerful equations that have ever been discovered by anybody. That by James Clerk Maxwell, comparable to the 3 laws of Newton. But these are all out there. They're about things out there in the surrounding world, whereas Buddhist discoveries of the nature of karma, this is right where we live. Because we as sentient beings, we're not just scientists observing reality, we are suffering. We want happiness. We don't want to suffer. These are 4 laws that can actually lead us away from suffering and the causes of suffering. So there was his discovery during the 2nd watch of the night. But he wasn't satisfied, just to know how things are going on. If we compare this to some responses to theories of reincarnation, so I've heard this so many times, I just start chuckling whenever I hear it nowadays. People hear about reincarnation, say, oh good, that means I get to live again. I'll get to see my parents again. I'll get to come back and enjoy life again. I'll get another chance. Oh, isn't it great that there's reincarnation? Because I never want to die, I never want to perish. Oh, I get to live life after life after life. Big happy smile comes. Oh boy. Is that really what you want? Are you really willing to face eternity? The possibility that there is never any escape from reality, no matter what you do? That you'll just keep on going and going, getting born and getting older and getting sick and dying. Oh boy, now you got to be born and get older and sick and die. Oh boy, how many times before the glamour wears off and you think, you know, I've been there and done that already. Is there any option to just cycling on and on and on and on? But the Buddha saw this is how we perpetuate from lifetime to lifetime, how we get propelled, again, not by somebody else. Nobody did it to us. Not the Buddha, God, angels, devils, nobody. This is just the nature of reality. That was his 2nd great discovery. That should really be enough for a night. One can say, okay, I think I'm going to take a nap now, you know. But not for him. No, he had the 3rd watch of the night coming. The 3rd watch of the night came, and he then proceeded to ascertain the exhaustion of defilements. And that is seeing how the wheel of samsara moves in forward motion from the 12 links of dependent origination, seeing how we get stuck and perpetuate that. How about rolling that back? Where is there a way to freedom? So unraveling this yarn, this set of knots that binds us in samsara. In the 3rd watch of the night, he looked for the exhaustion of defilements that lie at the root of suffering. He said, I had direct knowledge as it actually is, that this is suffering. A complete diagnosis. That is, he saw all of the symptoms of the reality of suffering. You might recall that. It's the first reality for Aryas. And he scanned it completely. He saw all dimensions of suffering to which we are vulnerable. He saw the problem. He saw the problem. Latent suffering, suffering of change, existential suffering. He scoped it all. He got it completely. That this is suffering, And this is the origin of suffering. Then he saw what is the underlying core cause for our essential, existential vulnerability to suffering. This is the origin of suffering, and he saw this is the cessation of suffering. It's an extraordinary insight, a mind-boggling discovery, that we as sentient beings, we are not hardwired, we are not intrinsically vulnerable to suffering. We don't have to suffer simply because we are conscious. There is actually a way to liberation, and this is the cessation, the reality of the cessation of suffering. And then finally, and this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. In that third watch of the night, he discovered 4 truths, 4 realities. One might think he was finished, but then there came the 4th watch of the night, and he was liberated. He was liberated. When liberated, there came the knowledge, it is liberated. He knew that he was free. He knew that he had awakened. I had direct knowledge. Birth is exhausted. Birth that is propelled by klesha, mental afflictions, and karma. He recognized now, I've seen deeply enough, I've cut the root. Birth is exhausted. Never again will I be propelled into. It's over. It'll never happen again, of being just helplessly propelled into the next existence, like caught up in a hurricane and spit out the other end. That'll never, ever, ever, ever happen again to him. Birth is exhausted. The holy life has been lived out. What was to be done is done. There is no more of this to come. That is, I finished with samsara. This was the 3rd true knowledge attained by me in the 4th watch of the night. Ignorance was banished and true knowledge arose. Darkness was banished and light arose, as happens in one who is diligent, ardent, and self-controlled. But I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over the mind. I think I may have conflated just terminology, not content. If I screw up content, I'm really doing a disservice. But whether that was the 3rd watch of the night or the 4th watch, okay, that's semantics. But that was it. He realized the 4 noble truths, and there was liberation therein. So whether we call it the 3rd or 4th, I think my notes had made it look, because I noticed he said, I have here in the notes, that was the 3rd watch of the night under the heading of the 4th watch of the night. So check that out. That's just my fallibility. But the content about that is quite clear. And so summing up his direct knowledge of dependent origination, he declared, such was the insight, the knowledge, the understanding, the vision, the light that arose in me about things not heard before. So, and again, I'm going to push a little bit further on this analogy of Galileo. Galileo saw things that nobody in recorded history had ever seen before. And that is, Copernicus had already come out with a very brilliant mathematical theory that not the sun, but the earth was, not the earth, but the sun, get that one right, that it was a heliocentric, not a geocentric, that for centuries upon centuries the most brilliant people in all of Western civilization had assumed that the earth was the center. It's kind of obvious. You look and see the earth, the sun is going around, the earth is going around, the planets and the stars are all going around us. We are at the center, and after all, we're God's creation. Human beings are the pinnacle of creation. God created us, and this is all decoration. You know, all 3,000 stars. All 3,000 stars, because that's how many you can see with the naked eye, right? And that's what was believed, and that was still what believed at the time of Copernicus. But Copernicus came up with a very elegant mathematical theory that accounted for all the phenomena, as well as the Ptolemaic theory, but with less complexity, all those epicycles and eccentrics that made the medieval theory so complicated, with a bunch of ad hoc add-ons. He simplified it by putting the sun in the center, and the planets, including the earth, going around that. But for the people of his time, this is now the 16th century, it was just a very elegant theory. And it was still intellectually defensible to say, Copernicus, nice job, that's a nice mathematical theory, but frankly, we prefer the Ptolemaic, it's in our comfort zone. Because really, what's the advantage of putting the sun in the center when we human beings, we're God's creation? God didn't say on the 6th day he created the sun. That came much, much earlier. On the 6th day he created us. This is all for us. So there's no reason, we don't really like the notion of putting the sun in the center. Let's keep it things are, but thanks a million for a very nice mathematical theory. But it doesn't really explain anything any better than the theory we already have. So it's debatable. And the church really didn't mind that Copernicus had come out with a very cool theory. Said, yeah, that's a nice theory, but we have one that worked just as well for us, and actually, we prefer it. But Galileo comes along with his technological samadhi, known as a telescope, and he made one discovery that completely torpedoed an assumption that had been around for, what was it, something like 1400 years. And that was the assumption that everything goes around the sun. And that was the phases of Venus. The phases of Venus. He discovered that through his telescope. He saw something that nobody in recorded history had ever reported on, and that is, you look at well, you won't see it with the naked eye. You need the samadhi of a telescope, stable and clear, to be able to see that if you really gaze very carefully over a sustained period, you'll see that Venus is going through phases like the moon. But if the Earth is at the center, there's no way for Venus to have phases. Therefore, since Venus does have phases, the Earth is not at the center. And that blew away that whole theory that had never been questioned for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. It was not because he argued better, came out with a better mathematical theory, but he saw empirical evidence. And this is all empiricism. The Buddha did not give one syllogism for past lives, for karma, for the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, way to liberation, the reality of liberation. There was no one inference there, any more than Galileo was making inferences. He saw the phases of Venus. He saw spots on the sun, craters on the moon, and so forth and so on. It was direct observation, direct knowledge. We could put this in the mouth of Galileo. But this now is a way of actually finding liberation. So that was his awakening. And he said, I discovered things not heard before. So as Galileo made discoveries that nobody in recorded history had ever reported on, they didn't have the technology. The technology was there, but it had not been used prior to the Buddha. The Four Noble Truths, nobody discovered them. The 12 links of dependent origination, no one had discovered them. No one in recorded history. Now, were there Buddhas in previous whole cycles of the cosmos? Yes, but not in recorded history. They were beyond. In his whole era, in our historical era, he was the first one. He was the great Galileo of liberation. So here is one who is awake. He awakened here. He rested in his awakening for 49 days, and then, as we know, he walked to Saranath. He turned the first wheel of Dharma. But what was the nature of his awakening? And this is what Ravi asked me to comment on. What is the nature of enlightenment? What is the nature of a Buddha's awakening? Of course, one can speak for years about this, based upon different canons, the Pali canon, the Sanskrit, the Mahayana, the Vajrayana, and so forth. But one can summarize an explanation of what it means to be awake, or what is the nature of an awakened mind, in terms of three qualities. They really do summarize what it is to be awake. Three qualities. And the first is to awaken, is to expand your scope of knowledge, what you know, the field of your awareness, the scope of your knowledge. It is vastly, one might say infinitely, expanded. The veils are removed, and your awareness becomes unimpeded. But what exactly is the nature of a Buddha's wisdom, a Buddha's direct awareness, the scope of a Buddha's consciousness? How much of reality is a Buddha's mind aware? Well, let's just go to the Buddha's own words, rather than our trying to imagine, to interpret, to speculate. Here's one statement by the Buddha. Monks, whatsoever in the world, with its hosts of recluses and Brahmins, of devas and humans, in short, all kinds of sentient beings, whatsoever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, attained, searched into, and pondered over by the mind, all that I do know. In other words, everything has been known by everybody else. Through one night of awakening, that is all evident to me. So there's a pretty strong epistemic claim of the expansion, almost like the supernova of his awareness, that now is without obscuration, without impediment. There's a very famous analogy that he gives, and it's so good, you may have heard it before, but I thought again I would quote it directly from the sutras. And so I will read it. Because very clearly, whether you're dealing with the Pali canon, the Sanskrit, the Tibetan canon, the Chinese canon, Vajrayana, Dzogchen, what have you, clearly not all of human knowledge, not from that time and not nowadays, is to be found in the Buddhist teachings as recorded in any of the canons. Where's neuroscience? Where's chemistry? Where's the discovery of the atomic structure of water? What is the function of the gallbladder? I mean, there's an awful lot of knowledge that isn't there. How old is the Earth? What's the core of the Earth made out of? Did life evolve, or are all this species all static? There's an awful lot that isn't there. So the Buddha is saying, you know, my awareness is unimpeded. It's just unimpeded. But then we look at the teachings, but that's very contained, that's very limited. You didn't talk about a whole bunch of things. I'm really curious about, what's DNA look like? Hey, where is it? I'm looking and not seeing it. So why do we have these limitations in terms of the teachings the Buddha gave? And he answered that question. So the Buddha was once staying at Kosambi in Simsapa forest. As I recall, he was walking with Ananda. Reaching down, he scooped up a handful of leaves and held them out in the palm of his hand. Of the bhikkhus who were accompanying him, the Buddha asked, which are more numerous, the few Simsapa leaves in my hand or those overhead in the Simsapa forest? Not surprisingly, the bhikkhus replied that in comparison to the leaves in the entire forest, the leaves in the Buddha's hands were but few. In the same way, monks, and now the Buddha is speaking in response, in the same way, monks, those things that I have known with direct knowledge, but have not taught, are far more numerous than what I have taught. And why haven't I taught them? Because they are not connected with the goal, do not relate to the rudiments of the holy life, do not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. That is why I have not taught them. In other words, he turned out to have only about 45 years that he was teaching. It's a very finite period. If you want to give an encyclopedia, say everything about DNA, everything about the history of the universe, everything about galaxies and black holes and electromagnetism and classical physics and so forth, 45 years is just too short. And then people would have this vast glut of information, and they might completely lose the track. Oh, I'm really curious about Jello. You know, what's the chemical constitution? Find out about everything we can about Jello. Or years ago, I heard about somebody doing a PhD dissertation on the parasites and the internal lining of chickens' guts. And he spent years studying parasites that you find on the intestinal lining of chickens' intestines. He got curious about that. Why? I'm not quite sure. But that's what captured his attention. And Buddha never talked about it. You'll look in vain for the Buddha's discourse on the nature of parasites in the guts of chickens. You know? So if this fellow is curious, he would not find that in Buddhism. Right? But if you're curious about the nature of suffering, which we already are, if you'd like to be free of suffering, you can't just be mopping up the symptoms, you have to go to the cause. If you'd like to know, are we intrinsically imbued with the causes of suffering, or is there a possibility of freedom, then you need to know about cessation. And once you see the issue, then you say, okay, now there's only one question left. We know we're suffering, we know there must be causes of suffering, we can know that. That kind of hurt. Okay, there's causality here. You don't have to look too hard. But the notion that there's cessation, that's extraordinary. Freud didn't believe it. Virtually nobody in Western civilization believed there's suffering, except for people who believe in materialism. They think suicide is the end of suffering, right? Or if you're a devout Christian, you may feel that all I have to do is die and be born in heaven. That's a cessation. But whoever empirically corroborates that and comes back and reports. But in terms of suffering, cessation of suffering in this lifetime, I invite you to find Western civilization that says, yes, here is a way in this lifetime, not depending on faith, some outer force, Jesus, Yahweh, or any other outer being, but in this lifetime it is possible to be irreversibly and radically free of suffering and its causes. I challenge you to find anyone who said that in the whole history of classical China before Buddhism came in. The Mayan civilization, the Greek civilization, the Roman, the Abrahamic civilizations. Did anybody say that? And I don't think so. But this was the Buddha's proposition, and so all of his teachings then always were almost like the Four Noble Truths. I'll keep on calling that because it's been called so many times. They were like the Bodhitree. That was the core. And all of the tendrils, all of the branches, all of the leaves that would flow out of this central structure, this central root of his teachings, the Four Noble Truths, they had to be related to those four issues. And the atomic structure of water is just not that relevant. Right? And so many other things, including the poor parasites inside chickens' guts. You know, you really can achieve liberation without knowing about that. And so the Buddha didn't want people to get distracted. This is why I've not talked about all those other leaves in the forest. Don't get distracted. there's some really, really important knowledge here. Life is short. And this is an opportunity. You have encountered the teaching of a Buddha, one who is awake. How many things do you want to be curious about? How many things do you want to know about? Your life is ticking away right now. The sands of time are going irreversibly away. For all your previous lifetimes, you wish to be free of suffering. In all future lifetimes, wishing to be free of suffering. And in this lifetime, here's a formula. Don't get distracted. This is it. This is your opportunity. You've met with the Buddha, or at least you've met with the teachings of a Buddha, and now's your opportunity. As they say now in later Buddhism, this is the precious, rare, perfect human rebirth. The precious human rebirth. Now in this opportunity, unlike countless other lifetimes, where we got curious about chicken's guts, and H2O, and gardening, and roses, and hairstyling, and so many things that people get curious about. And then, I'm sorry, piss away their lives. And then wind up old and retired, and they just say, oh, I just spent 87 years on the planet, and what did I do? I went around the block. That is, when I was a little tiny baby, I was just peeing in my pants all the time, and now I'm 87, and I'm incontinent, and I'm peeing in my pants all the time. And I'm crying, and my mind is not clear, but wait a minute, that's where I started. And I just went around the block. I just went around the block. And so he's saying, this is why, he said, there are many things that may be known, but this is what I taught. Don't get distracted. These are the four noble. Everything that I'm teaching is going to be directly related. So there's the Buddha's knowledge. It is said in the most conservative account of the Buddha's extrasensory perception that wherever he directed his attention in space or time, with volition, what's happening there? Where were you 500 lifetimes ago? What's happening 8,000 miles away? Wherever he directed his attention, it would become manifest. And there are many, many accounts of that. So it was unimpeded. In the most conservative, it was like a laser pointer. He had directed his attention, and there it would be. But there are also indications that sometimes something would just come up that was relevant, and it would catch his attention, distant in space, distant in time, and he would know that as well. So, an extraordinary claims about, really not just about one individual, but about the nature of all of us who have Buddha nature. The capacity of our own minds, of basically unlimited capacity for knowing reality as it is, both in its depths, knowing the nature of nirvana, of emptiness, of Buddha nature, but also knowing the nature of reality in its vast breadth. So, for the Buddha's knowledge, that's the first of the three qualities. First, the knowledge, the wisdom, the scope of awareness, of knowing. And the second one is the Buddha's compassion. In Tibetan it's Kien Se Nu Sung. Kien is knowing, Se is compassion, kindness, loving kindness. What's the scope? And this one can really be summarized quite easily. If we imagine the strongest paradigm in human existence, the one that crops up in all civilizations throughout time for all of human existence, and crops up in many but not all other species, and that is what? The love of a mother for a child. Right? The love of a mother for a child. Happily, without even a second thought, willing to sacrifice her own life, but also give away food as she starves. Happily giving the food to the child as she becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, but seeing my child is not getting weaker, my child not getting weaker, and then I'm happy. They're both sick, giving the medicine to the child, but I'm happy. I'm going to die, but look, my child may survive. Right? Giving the clothing, I'm cold, I'm really suffering, but look, my child is not suffering. My child is warm. I'll strip naked. My child will be warm. That is our most powerful, dominant, ubiquitous example through all of human existence. More so than the husband, the father. Sometimes with the father, but don't count on it. But the mother we can count on more than anything else. We all know, not every single time, but it's the most common one. It's the most common one. And now imagine that magnified beyond all imagination, that the Buddha views every sentient being. Whether they are drug addicts, whether they're criminals, they're murderers, they're serial killers, they are saints, they're adorable, they're sweet, they're virtuous, they're unvirtuous, equally, like a mother with just unconditional love for a single child, Imagine that is the Buddha's love, the Buddha's compassion for every sentient being. And that gives us the faintest glimmer of the scope and the depth of the Buddha's mind, which actually is inconceivable. But that's as close as we can come to imagine a mother's love, but now extending that to all sentient beings. There is a Buddha's compassion. And that's unveiled. It's not achieved so much as unveiled. It's right there in the nature of the Buddha nature itself. And then the one that a lot of people get very intrigued by, because we as human beings, we're power hungry, want power. What about the Buddha? Is he simply very wise and very compassionate? Or does the achievement of awakening, of Buddhahood, does it come with some muscle? Some muscle. Is there any power in the nature of consciousness when it's unveiled, all the defilements having been purified? And the answer is quite interesting, and I'm going here to one of the classic sources from the Theravada tradition, all based on the Pali Canon. And here there are references to 5 types of extrasensory perception. This goes back to the scope of the Buddha's knowledge, but it also taps into just power of mind over matter. So, in terms of this category, the first of these is called siddhis or iddhis in Pali, and that is paranormal abilities. Having become one, he becomes many, and that is the Buddha's ability, by the power of his mind, to multiply his own form. He's one, he can manifest as 2, or as 100, or 1,000, or 10,000, and as many as he likes, rather like the power. I mean, it's I think, not a bad analogy. What is the capacity of the moon to produce reflections of itself in bodies of water? One, gosh, there's a pool of water. Look, there's the moon, and there are 2 of them now, and you look at them, they're virtually identical, right? If it's a nice, clear pool, still pool of water, you look at it, it's just bright. You have to squint, say, wow, it's just 2 images, and then you look, oh, there's another. Oh, boy, that's a powerful moon up there. 2 images. But of course, wherever there's a pool of water, that is the power of the moon. However, wherever, and this is the thing, wherever there is ability to be of service, there the Buddha can manifest. It's just a matter of how many pools of water there are. There is the ability of the Buddha to manifest in more than one place at the same time or over time. In Tibetan Buddhism, it's not all uncommon for a single great yogi, like a Dujum Lingpa, or a Dujum Rinpoche, for that matter a Karmapa, or many others, when they're taking rebirth. Not just one. Why be so stingy? Right? Dujum Rinpoche, 2 simultaneously, one born in Tibet, one born in Bhutan, both about the same age, they're about 20 years old or so by now, both recognized, corroborated by His Holiness Dalai Lama. So there's no debate there, there's no bickering, which is the real one, which is, oh, give me a break here, right? One is manifesting in 2 pools of water. They're both incarnations, tukus of Dujum Rinpoche, right? Interestingly enough, sometimes the tuku may come before the last one's died, as in the case of the Panchen Lama. The incarnation, the one that His Holiness identified, as I recall, that came before the last one died. So you don't necessarily have to have it totally sequential. It just splits. When you say, oh, there's a hurry here, I'm not quite ready to die yet, but they need me over there. Okay. And send a tendril of your own consciousness, and you can have a tuku before you've died. It's called Mande tuku, a tuku before you've died. Right? So the capacity there is kind of unimaginable. And there are many other, numerous expressions of the power of the mind over the 5 elements. Read through the Pali Canon, let alone the Mahayana Canon. But the power of the mind over matter. Multiple ways of understanding it, but extraordinary. Let's just leave it at that. There is clairaudience, or what is called deva ear, of being able to hear sounds that are very, very far distant, way beyond sound waves. Clairaudience, extrasensory perception of sound, other people's speech and so forth. Knowledge of other people's minds. And this is especially for a teacher, one who is intent on leading others to liberation. I know some of you must be medical doctors. Can you imagine trying to be a medical doctor and not having any equipment, not even a stethoscope? Let alone x-rays, let alone blood tests, none of the above. Just you get a look at a person and say, well, yeah, there you are. You know? Eyes a little bit bloodshot. Wonder what that means. To be a healer in the sense of a great physician leading people on the path to liberation You really want to be able to see directly into other people's minds. Not because you're a peeping Tom, or you're just curious, you want to invade other people's privacy. Any more than a physician comes in, or I really want to see your bones. Man, I'm so curious, I'm going to use an x-ray to be, peeping Tom to see your bones. Of course not. You want to see as much, to perceive as much going on in the body as you possibly can for only one reason. And that is see where's the problem? How shall I proceed to help heal you? And so knowledge of other people's minds, knowledge of past lives. And that is when people are experiencing psychological difficulties, all kinds of things coming up. You might want to trace what are the deep causes. You can understand them, say, here's a cause, we need to address the deep causes in past lives to be able to attend to it. That would be very helpful. Clairvoyance, it's called Deva Eye, including knowledge of the passing away and reappearances of beings. There's this as well, with the Buddha, we reported on this on the night of his own enlightenment. Knowledge of the future. That enters into a complex area that I don't have time to unpack right now. Is it the case that the Buddha knows everything that will ever happen in the future? The answer is no. Is it the case that since the future hasn't happened yet, the Buddha doesn't know anything about the future? No. So I'll give briefly, because I think it's so interesting, that there are some things in the future for which the sufficient causes and conditions have already assembled, that some things in the future are already determined. Some things, like the coming of the Buddha Maitreya, that is already determined. He will be the next one, but exactly when? And I've asked my own lamas about this. Exactly when, how long will it be? He said, we don't know that yet, because that depends on how we sentient beings, how we conduct ourselves, whether it's earlier or later. So that he will come, that it will be Maitreya, these will be his background and so forth, that's set, but exactly when will it come? No, that's not formed yet, right? And so it's like as we look to the ocean of the future, there are some islands for which there's already certain knowledge, that will be the case. And around it, it's all an ocean of potential, of possibilities that have not yet gelled, not yet crystallized. And that's where our own actions, our intentions in the present moment are shaping the future. We're not just waiting for it to happen. So the notion of destiny, of fate, as if the whole world is already hardwired for everything to already occur, that absolutely has no place in Buddhism at all. So that interesting balance between some aspects of the future are knowable and some yet have not gelled. And so knowledge of the future, knowledge of karmic consequences of prior actions, crucial. And so a lot more can be said about that, but let's just leave that, and that is, these types of paranormal abilities, extrasensory perception, can be achieved simply by way of jhana, achieving the jhanas, the samapatis in the formless realm. They can be achieved, you can shortcut a lot of that by gaining realization of emptiness. By realizing emptiness, that can open up whole powers of the mind, siddhis, and also extra knowledge. And then by realizing Rigpa, I'm jumping right into Vajrayana Dzogchen, by realizing Rigpa, this is straight from His Holiness, by realizing Rigpa, then also extraordinary powers can come up from that. Whether or not you've achieved jhanas, it can come by tapping into Buddha mind. And so there is the Buddha's awakening, as we have now about 10 minutes left. His wisdom, his compassion, and then his powers, an extraordinary array, and all of these are discussed in great length. We don't need to speculate. There is lots of evidence of eyewitness accounts of the Buddha himself as a historical individual living many centuries ago. But eventually he achieved not only nirvana, but he achieved parinirvana. So some of you, I think, have been to Kusnagar, okay? Lying down on his right side, and then if you read the Parinirvana Sutta, then you can hear the accounts. Now, here's a very important point. Who wrote the account? There the Buddha. What can see? What can anybody see? The Buddha gives his final teaching, and then he lies down on his right side, and after a while he stops breathing. That's what a dog or a cat, a plumber or a farmer could see. I don't think he's breathing anymore. That would be the account of a farmer. The Buddha came here, he lied down, and he stopped breathing. That's the Mahaparinibbana Sutta from a farmer's perspective. He lay down, he stopped breathing. I've seen other people do that too, but he lay down on the right side, so it's been unusual. That would be a very simple version. But it wasn't just farmers, goat herders and so forth observing this. There were arhats who had their own clairvoyance. And they were watching from a deeper perspective. So the account of the Buddha's parinibbana, we're still dealing with the issue of enlightenment. But what happens at the end? What's the end game? What's the end of the story? What's the nature of his enlightenment now that he's passing away? And the account we have in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta is from the perspective of those who are observing it, recorded in the Pali Canon, and they were Shravaka Arhats. And they described his going into, as he lay down, going through the four jhanas, going into all the samapatis, coming back down, and then going up to the, as I recall, the fourth jhana, and then passing away. The farmer, the nomad, wouldn't know that. What do they know about the jhanas and the samapatis, right? But this is an arhat, a Shravaka arhat, viewing the Buddha's parinirvana with the depth of extrasensory perception, but also the limitations of one who is not a Buddha, but is trying to make sense of the Buddha's final parting from the perspective of a Shravaka arhat. In other words, the role of the observer participant, is really crucial. What was the real nature of the Buddha's parinirvana? Was there a Buddha watching on? No, we have the account in the Pali Canon of arhats who are looking on. And that's their account from their perspective, with the depth but also the limitations of an arhat. And so in the Theravada tradition, there's an underlying assumption that the world is really out there, and something's really happening, and there is a real account of what's really going on. It's called metaphysical realism. The world is really out there, and these teachings are to report on what's really going on. So they felt they had kind of nailed the Buddhist parinirvana. We saw it, this is what we reported, that's what really took place. But that's not the only perspective. If you read the Mahayana perspective on the Buddhist parinirvana, it wasn't just going through jhanas and then out like a light and a total extinction and the end of the story, and that's the end of the Buddha. He strived for 3 countless eons to become a Buddha, was a Buddha for 45 years, and then was out like a light and never serves anybody for the rest of eternity. That is the Theravada position. And the Mahayana position says, well, boy, you didn't get that one right. You got a lot right about his awakening, but man, you totally missed the ball when it came to his parinirvana. Because that was just rather like a pool of water drying up, like a reflection drying up, and that particular reflection vanishes. It goes poof. It doesn't go anywhere here to there. The reflection of the moon in the water doesn't reincarnate. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just not there anymore. Because the Buddha had saw that for that lifetime, in Tibetan we say gomba zopa, roya, gomba zopa. He'd finished what he needed to do. He asked before he passed away, do any of you have any questions left? It was the final time. Do you have any questions left? And there was silence. Okay then. Bye-bye. You know? And that particular reflection then evaporated. But the Mahayana, I think, sees infinitely deeper than that of the Shravaka Arhat, who just sees he was there and now he's not there. Because from the Mahayana perspective, what we're seeing here is a reflection of the moon in the water, the Namanakaya, of which there are countless throughout the universe. That one just disappeared. But what lingers is the Dhammakaya, which has no beginning, no end, and will continue for as long, as Shantideva says, for as long as space remains, for as long as sentient being remain, so long shall I remain to alleviate the suffering of the world. In other words, the Buddha's job, the Buddha's work, job description, is not finished when you just die. It's not finished until all sentient beings are liberated. And that Dhammakaya will continue to manifest as Sambhogakaya and manifest infinitely as Nimanakaya. It's an infinitely vaster vision of what the Buddha's parinirvana means. And not just, okay, 45 years, it was great being a Buddha for 45 years, and now, gone, inactive for eternity. I've heard His Holiness speak about this, and I think, of course, I think he's exactly right. It's rather anticlimactic. If you think of striving on the path for 3 countless eons, which is trillions of years, and then you get to be an active Buddha, of active service for 45 years. That's like, what? It's so short, and you've left all these sentient beings behind. Really, how could that be? Right. So it really, frankly, doesn't make any sense. The Mahayana comes in much deeper. But what is the nature of this consciousness that continues? The first answer is it's inconceivable. Is it just the consciousness that's included in the 5 skandhas? No. The Buddha is very clear. The consciousness that arises independent upon karma and klesha, that is conditioned from lifetime to lifetime, that continuum of mental consciousness, including the bhavanga, the subtle continuum, or in Tibetan yiginabhishipi gyuntamo, the subtle continuum of mental consciousness, conditioned by, that's terminated. It's cut. But does that mean total annihilation, total cessation? The Pali Canon doesn't say that, the Theravada tradition doesn't say that, and of course the Mahayana doesn't say that. So what lingers on after? Did the Buddha ever speak about what becomes of a Buddha, or for that matter an Arhat, after the body is finished and there will be no more rebirth by the power of karma and klesha? What then? It's kind of an important question if we are going to devote this lifetime and as many lifetimes as it takes to achieve Buddhahood. It would be good to know, well, what happens if you're Buddha and then you die? It'd be good to have some idea. Do you get to enjoy being a Buddha just for a few decades and then out like a light? And this came up, not frequently, but it does come up in the Pali Canon, let alone in many, many Mahayana sutras. But the Buddha spoke in the Pali Canon of an unborn, undying dimension of reality, namely nirvana, and the timeless, non-manifesting consciousness that experiences it even after the death of one who has achieved such liberation. In other words, a dimension of consciousness that's beyond samsara, that is really non-dual from nirvana, that is beyond time. In the Kevadatta Sutta, the Buddha raises the question, where do earth, water, fire, and air have no footing? Where are long and short, small and great, fair and foul? Where are name and form wholly destroyed? And the answer is where consciousness is signless. Now we're speaking of a dimension of consciousness that's beyond concepts. Signless, boundless, all luminous. That's where earth, water, fire, and air find no footing, where both long and short, small and great, fair and foul, where name and form are wholly destroyed, where with the cessation of consciousness, this is all destroyed. So with the cessation of conditioned consciousness, there's another dimension. And of course we call it Dharmakaya. We call it Rigpa. We call it Buddha nature. That is beyond, and that's what lingers. So there's one Theravada, this is working out well. There's one Theravada scholar, relatively recently, called Jnana Nada Bhikkhu, so Theravada tradition. But this is something that doesn't come up very often in the Theravada. It's all over Mahayana, of Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nimanakaya. But then one looks in the Pali Canon and says, is this just a later fabrication? Or is there right there in the most widely accepted body of the Buddhist teachings, the Pali Canon, any references? And this Theravada Buddha explains that in Nirvana, the four elements, Nirvana, which again, understanding Nirvana is equivalent to Shunyata, right? That in Nirvana the four elements have no basis. There are no earth, water, fire, air in emptiness. Hence in the Heart Sutra, with respect to emptiness, right? There is no, none of the 18 dhatus, none of the 12 ayatanas, none of the 5 elements, none of the 5 skandhas. No. They have no footing whatsoever in emptiness. They have no footing in Nirvana. The four elements have no basis, for the familiar categories of name and form, subject and object, mind and matter vanish with the disappearance of ordinary conceptually conditioned consciousness. So that is irreversibly terminated. He comments, this is corrective to the common notion that the four elements can cease altogether somewhere, a notion that has its roots in the popular conception of self-existing material elements. But the Buddha's formulation of the question and the concluding line are meant to combat this misconception. In other words, a dimension of reality that is unconditioned, nirvana, shunyata, but a dimension of consciousness also that has no beginning, no end, no location, that is beyond all prapancha, is beyond all conceptual elaborations even, and I move a little bit into Dzogchen, even beyond the constructs of existence and non-existence, of birth and death, coming and going, and finally, is the Buddha mind, is it one or is it many? Those are the four the 8 conceptual extremes: existence, non-existence, birth and cessation, going and coming, one and many. And when one tries to fathom what is the nature of Dharmakaya, the nature of Rigpa, it's beyond all of those, even beyond the categories of existence and non-existence, let alone everything else. And so is there one Dharmakaya, is there many? Is the Buddha's Dharmakaya and Maitreya's Dharmakaya, are they one or are they fundamentally different? Does not compute. You will never wrap your conceptual mind around Dharmakaya. It is, and this is Tsongkhapa, it's Dzogchen, it's everywhere. The final word about the Buddha's mind is, give it a rest. It's inconceivable, but it's not unknowable. And so, the Buddha claimed that, like Galileo, making unprecedented discoveries, he said, for this whole historical era, that is, in this era, he was the one that made these discoveries for the first time. It was unprecedented. So I want to bring this back to the 21st century. And that is when we hear accounts like this, one can say this is a Buddhist sermon. From the faithful, perhaps to the faithful. So for Buddhists, we believe what I just said. Okay, so what does that mean? If I've just taught this and I've based this on the Buddhist teachings, we have at least one monk listening to see whether what I'm saying is just my make-believe, my own phony baloney, or whether this is really based upon authoritative sources in the Buddhist tradition. Okay, at least one good witness. So, shall we simply accept this out of faith? Never mind cutting, rubbing, burning, never mind checking out with our own experience. Just, oh, Kyapsuchi, I take refuge. This is the Buddha. The Buddha is omniscient. Whatever he said must be true. My Lama said must be true. His Holiness Dalai Lama said must be true. Shall we accept this just religiously? Like religious people all over the world are born into a tradition, whether it's Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, for that matter, atheist, just the modern religion. My dad's an atheist, therefore I also believe there is no God. That's just one more metaphysical belief. There isn't one instead of there is one. They're both metaphysical beliefs. So shall we approach this religiously, just out of faith? That's a possibility, and frankly, most Buddhists do. It's the easiest thing to do. My parents believe this, therefore of course I believe it. I'm a good son, I'm a good daughter. So that's one way of doing it. Just accept it religiously. Or we can think about it, we can be very clever, and we can think about it a lot, and analyze and investigate and read and talk and write papers and debate and debate and debate, and be very clever. Oh, now I have a really good understanding of the 5 paths, the 10 bhumis, the nature of enlightenment, the 18 qualities, and all of that. I am a great philosopher of Buddhism. I know everything and I've experienced nothing. So we can become philosophers of enlightenment, but never even get the taste. Write whole big books about water and never even have a teaspoon for ourselves. Then we're a philosopher of Buddhism. We're Buddhist scholars. Write big fat books on the nature of enlightenment and nirvana and never even get a drop of it ourselves. Then we're philosophers. But if we're really scientists of the mind, then we'll follow the Buddhist teachings as Geshe Dorje Damdu quoted yesterday. Monks and you and those who are wise, just as the goldsmith tests the gold with cutting, with rubbing, and with burning, so test my teachings with your own experience, but do not accept them simply out of reverence for me. That's not asking us to be religious, it's not asking us to be philosophers, it's asking us to be scientists. Scientists of the reality of suffering, of the origins of suffering, scientists taking the hypothesis of the cessation of suffering, and scientists putting to the test of experience the path of ethics, of samadhi and wisdom, to see for ourselves, is what this little Dharma talk that I've given, which is now finished, is it true or is it false? As religious people, all we can do is believe or not believe. As philosophers, we can be clever or not clever. But as scientists, we have the possibility of knowing. And so is there really anything more worthwhile in this or any future lifetime than to take these hypotheses, the most magnificent hypotheses about what it is to be a sentient being, that right now we're in the ocean of suffering, but each of us has Buddha nature, the capacity to be enlightened, to realize for ourselves the wisdom, the compassion and power of a Buddha. We have that possibility, and here's the path. We have it available. We're healthy, we're intelligent, we have the vitality. In this or any future lifetime, is there anything more worthwhile than to become a scientist of enlightenment? To know for ourselves, get our own telescope out, make our own observations, and then, like the Buddha, say, I know through my own experience, this is the reality of suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is cessation, and this is the path. And I know through my own direct experience, my own direct knowledge, what was done, what needed to be done has been done, and I too am awake. That will be finally the only thing that will bring the Buddha full satisfaction. That we take his hypotheses, put them to the test, and find out whether they're true or not through our own immediate experience. If we don't do that, then really what was the point of his getting up from his seat here and walking to Saranat? He could have just enjoyed a very nice life, sitting under the Bodhitree and say, it's swell to be enlightened, and I'm enjoying it. Right? But he had a sense a few other people had little dust on their eyes, and they too could see the truth for themselves. So I'll end on this note. You remember that when he first turned the wheel of Dharma, one of the 5 disciples, you remember his name? Kondanya. Right there, by the time he gave the discourse, one saw nirvana for himself. And when he saw that, he knew the cessation of suffering. He knew it was possible because nirvana is peace. It's the fourth symbol, the fourth seal that Geshe Damdu spoke about yesterday. Jnanadeva jiva, the transcendence of suffering is peace. Kondanya saw for himself the reality of the Third Noble Truth. And only when he had that realization himself can we say, the wheel of Dharma was turned. So the wheel of Dharma was turned in Sadhana almost 2,600 years ago. Then we can ask, will the wheel of Dharma be turned in 2011, 2012, 2015 and 20 and 2030 and 40? Will the wheel of Dharma be turned, or will we just have a lot of people talking about Dharma and nobody getting it? Right? So if the wheel of Dharma is still to be turned, it's not enough for well-informed people or even realized people to talk about Dharma, to share Dharma, to reveal the path. For the wheel of Dharma to be turned, somebody has to listen, gain understanding, gain realization, and be liberated. And then we can see in the 21st century, the wheel of Dharma is still being turned. So we have the old generation of these great lamas who have passed away. Kyabchi Jinchen Rinpoche, Ling Rinpoche, Dujun Rinpoche, so many from all the traditions passed away. They turned the wheel of Dharma. They were still leading other people to liberation. And now the Dharma we see in some ways degenerating. But now will the wheel of Dharma continue to turn? And that's up to exactly people like us. We can't say, oh no, leave it to the monks, leave it to the nuns, leave it to somebody else. And in the meantime, they're saying, oh yeah, but leave it to somebody else, I'm really busy. It's so easy, leave it to somebody else, the third person. Not you, not me, the third person, the other guy. So I think that places this enormous opportunity, this wish-fulfilling jewel in the palm of our hand. Would you like the wheel of Dharma to turn for you? In which case it's not enough to hear, not enough to think. We need to meditate and then know it for ourselves through our own direct experience. So that was something in the nature of the Buddha's enlightenment. So 30 seconds. Let's just dedicate merit. Quietly, here we are in this sacred place. Dedicate the merit to the realization of your most meaningful aspirations. Emaho, Emaho. All good, all good. Ravi.
I need 5 minutes here to clean up. Then we'll go to the temple. Then we'll go to the temple.
This would be labeled as a contract. Would it be a contract?
Sure, of course. It's a scarf. And they come in all different colors. Let me put this away.
Always how much devotion I have for you and how much gratitude for you have just been the light of my life.
The Dhamma is the light of your life.
Well,